Where's Chris Whitty?
Well, as long as he stays off the TV screens, I don't particularly mind where he is. I think the points you make about where has Sage gone are very good ones, because they ran our lives for a
Yeah.
long time. They were in charge of the country, as far as I could tell, and they were giving instruction to the people we elected and telling them to shut us all down. So if these so-called experts disappear with their scaremongering and their hysterical models, then I think that's a good thing for the nation.
Yes, I think it is. However, I would like, as ever, to know how much we've paid them. People have asked me over the course of the last few months, Brendan, how do these people from Sage get appointed? You know, most of them seem to be attached to Imperial College or the London School of Tropical Medicine or something like that. But I know many of them are not paid because they've got other jobs, but certainly the Chief Medical Officer is a government job, as was all of his deputies. And I just think we should be told. It seems to me to be a habit in government now where if you don't tell anybody anything, they'll just never find out and they'll go away.
Yeah, well, that was one of the problems with these people. There was so little accountability, and the people who run the country are supposed to be accountable to us. That's how a democracy works. And we lived under the boot of an expert class over the past 2 years who we never voted for, we never elected. There were no mechanisms for us to hold them accountable. We don't know what they get paid. We don't know what they're thinking. We don't know what they're going to come up with next. We were really beholden to that section of society without having any democratic say-so over the policies they were coming up with. So that lack of accountability during the lockdown era, that was one of the key problems.
Yes, and I've noticed that some of the kind of slightly more lockdown-tastic scientists who were not actually in Sage, but there's that woman up in Edinburgh, wrote a piece to The Guardian the other day, talking about how, well, now that we've removed the fangs from COVID, we can approach it in a different way. And I read the piece and I was astonished at how kind of two-faced she'd become, talking about how, oh, well, of course, now we should now look at the economy, we should now look at the after effects of lockdown and why lockdown was bad in certain ways. Well, they never said any of that while lockdown was being ordered, did they?
Absolutely not. And I think we're going to witness a real reverse ferret over the next few months. I think a lot of the people who supported the first lockdown, which was the most severe, and subsequent lockdowns as well, I think they're going to start backtracking on just how enthusiastically they supported those lockdowns. They didn't raise questions at the time about the extraordinarily stupid rules we had to live under, playgrounds being locked up, yellow tape being put on park benches, people being swept out of parks for no reason whatsoever, people being, drones being used to monitor dog walkers in the Lake District. And of course, the far worse side of it, people being left to die alone, dementia sufferers being deprived of visits from loved ones, which can help to keep dementia sufferers alive and healthy. All of those tyrannical things that were done, none of these people raised questions at the time. And in fact, what they said to those of us who did raise questions is that we were reckless and dangerous and we wanted people to die. So they actively clamped down on discussion. And I think we can't let them revise history and revise the role that they played.
No, absolutely not. And I think more important than that even, and I was talking to Francis Hoare about this the other day, we have to ensure that this never happens again, because the ease with which the government was able to kind of enact all sorts of regulations and enact all sorts of rules without even discussing them in Parliament first and telling the police what they had to do, I was finding that incredibly overbearing and frankly untenable, and it should never happen again.
Absolutely. It must never happen again. And I would be surprised if it was possible to have a lockdown again, because people are increasingly skeptical that we need those kinds of extreme measures. The Omicron variant shows that people are more than capable of taking voluntaristic measures. Lots of people voluntarily limited their social life and limited their going outdoors in the run up to Christmas because they didn't want to catch Omicron. They didn't want to spread it to people. We can be trusted to take sensible precautions when we have to do that. We don't need these severe restrictions and these criminal laws to force us to behave in a particular way. And I think it's very important that even if there was another variant, even if there's another pandemic in the future, that we rely on the common sense and the decency of ordinary people to go about their lives and to take sensible measures rather than creating these vast reams of legislation that basically put us under house arrest.
Yeah.
That can never happen again.
And what have you made of the week's kind of doings as far as the government is concerned? You know, Sajid Javid coming out and basically saying, well, we're still going to push through the NHS vaccination mandate, and you will be fired if you haven't got 2 vaccinations or possibly 3 or maybe 4. But apart from that, basically everything else, all bets are off. You know, it was dangerous to go to school without a mask on Monday, but today apparently it's not.
I think I'm delighted at the scrapping of Plan B. I'm very happy about that. I think it's not enough. And what I mean by that is that we now need to have a broad national discussion about what happened. And if we don't do that, if we just say, okay, that was fine, we had a weird 22 months, but now we're getting back to normal, then we'll never have the reckoning that we need to have. You know, there are 6 million people now on the NHS waiting lists because the NHS basically told people not to use its services for the best part of a year. There are still tens of thousands of children who've dropped out of the school system. We know that health problems increased over the lockdown period because people were psychologically disorientated or they simply suffered from health problems that otherwise would have been seen to by doctors. And of course, there was the massive economic impact as well. Loads of job losses, economic downturn, and all those problems associated with that. So we have to now look back at what we did, ask if it was the right thing to do, and ask who was responsible for making these severe decisions about our lives. And if we don't do that, then we'll never learn from this experience.
No, exactly right. And I mean, I wonder now whether there will be a reckoning in the cabinet as well, because, you know, regardless of what happens to Boris Johnson, we've talked about that in the first hour, you know, my belief is still that he's done, he's dusted, he should move on, and he should have the cojones to do that. But my problem with the rest of the cabinet is that none of them really have shown any sort of leadership. They've all been very, very happy to inflict more and more regulations on the rest of the public, and they've been more and more happy to put more and more taxes on us. So I would like to see a proper Conservative cabinet made up of the likes of Steve Baker, maybe even Tom Tugendhat, some of the more, you know, vocal backbenchers, you know, even Tobias Ellwood, who I know has had a couple of run-ins with me because he was a bit of a Remainer. But these are all substantial figures, and they all seem to be, Graham Brady from the 1922 committee, they all seem to be people that get why they were elected and they get what ordinary people want.
I think that's what we need. We whoever it might be, and I think some of those names you mentioned there are very good candidates for this. We need people who understand why they were elected. That's exactly right. And that's what I think Boris has lost sight of. I think he's lost sight of who put him into power and why they put him into power. Right. He got this huge mandate in the general election of 2019, largely from millions of working class voters in the red wall areas who wanted to get Brexit done, who wanted to stop all the woke nonsense, who wanted to hold back the liberal technocracy we've all lived under for the past few decades. That's what they charged him with doing. And he's not done a very good job of it. No. It's partly down to his own political cowardice, I think, but it's also because he's got Carrie Antoinette whispering in his ear all the time and encouraging him to embrace all sorts of mad policies.
She's been an absolute disaster. I mean, somebody tweeted me last week and said she's done more harm to the Conservative Party than Jeremy Corbyn did to Labour.
It's extraordinary. You know, it's like, you know, those millions of working class voters in the Midlands and the North, they didn't vote for this very posh woman to push through eccentric middle class policies in Downing Street. Right. It's very, very anti-democratic what she is doing and what her clique is doing. So Boris has got to listen to people like her less, and he's got to listen to ordinary people more. They've got to remember they were put into power in order to sweep aside the old kind of woke establishment that's been running politics for the past few years and to do something new. And they're failing to do that. They
really are. And when you get the likes of Zach Goldsmith, who's one of her big mates, you know, who's been wealthy beyond belief for the most of his life, well, all of his life, really, living now high on the hog, sitting in the House of Lords, coming out and defending Boris. This was at the beginning of this whole kind of crisis after the whole business with the MP who was charged with sleaze. And it was all kind of a bit ridiculous. You're thinking, this is a guy who was elected by the Red Wall, by people who had voted Labour all their lives, people in mining communities who understood that Boris Johnson might have gone to Eton, but he got them, and he was doing what he was doing for them. And he seems to have just completely lost all of that because he's hanging around with the wrong people.
Yeah, the great thing about 2019, the election in that year, was that it was a great political realignment. It was a working class revolt against the Labour Party, which I've been waiting a long time, a large part of my life, for that to happen. It was very positive. It was ordinary people saying, listen, we think this strange, foppish man from Eton and Oxford understands us better than the Labour Party, than the party that was set up supposedly to represent our interests. And it was true. So they took a punt on Boris. They saw him as a better choice than Corbyn and probably than Starmer. And he's letting them down. Now, I think he can still pull it back. I think it will be a huge task, but he can still pull it back. But the only way he can do that is if he really turns around Downing Street, starts to speak to and understand what people want, takes Brexit more seriously, because that's not finished yet either, and starts to push back against the excesses of the chattering classes. If he doesn't do that, then he really deserves to lose.
And what do you make of those kind of diehard Boris Johnson fans who are occasionally coming and having a go at me and saying, what are you doing? Why are you attacking the only guy that got us out of Europe? Well, because sometimes people change and sometimes people use up their usefulness and sometimes it's time to get somebody new.
And I think one question is, which lots of people have asked, is who is the real Boris Johnson? Is it the kind of hip metropolitan mayor of London who was actually quite right on in many ways,
yeah, he was.
and felt very connected to the metropolitan elites in London? Or is it the Boris who made those appeals to the Northerners and the Midlanders of the Red Wall areas and said, I promise to represent your best interests? Who's the real Boris Johnson? My feeling is it's the mayor of London Boris is the real Boris. A leopard can't really change its spots. But what it can do, it can learn, if you're in a democracy, it can learn to heed the desires and the interests of ordinary people. That's where Boris is failing.
And he's actually always been quite good at that, but he can't seemingly do that now.
He can't do that now. And if you look at some of the issues he's changed on, for example, the green issue, he used to write some really interesting columns in the old days about how climate change alarmism was out of control and the world is not coming to an end and we've got to push back against the environmentalist lobby. And now he's as green as you can get, and that's no doubt down to Carrie's influence and other people too. But this is not the politics that ordinary working people are interested in. They want investment in their communities. They want public infrastructure. They want Brexit to be a reality, and they want to have democratic clout. And if this government doesn't deliver those things to those people, then it's in serious trouble.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Great to talk to you, Brendan. Thank you very much indeed. Brendan O'Neill, Chief Political Writer for Spiked, of course, there, talking perfect sense. For all of you people who think that this is unfair on Boris Johnson, that he's had a hard time, that it's been difficult for him because, he's got 2 young children. Well, he didn't have to have 2 young children. He didn't have to have a new wife. He didn't have to do the job that he's doing. And he didn't have to lock everybody down and listen to those idiots from Sage who now seem to have disappeared. You can't see him for dust. Where is Whitty? Where is he? Come and show yourself, man.